Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military of Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 29th of August of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction where the Russians continue their offensive operation. As for the western part of the Zaporizhzhia direction, during the previous 24 hours we haven't received anything. Most likely both the Russians and the Ukrainians are regrouping, and currently the main clashes are taking place for the territory between the area of Russian breakthrough that was recorded several days ago and the central part of the city of Stepnogorsk. We're talking about this area. As for the eastern flank of the Zaporizhzhia direction, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes on the ground were recorded. According to pro-Ukrainian resources, the Russians managed to improve their positions to the west of the settlement of Novasulka by taking under control additional tree lines. So nothing special, the only important thing is that the Russians continue advancing further in the western direction, shortening the distance to the next settlements in this area, very important settlements of Kupyansk and Novanikolaevka. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians improved their positions to the northeast of the settlement of Kamyshevaha. During the previous days, the Russians cut the settlement in cauldron or in pincers from the southwest and from the southeast, and now the Russians are advancing from the northeast, trying to shorten the distance and to cut the last supply and evacuation roads for the settlement. Obviously, the pockets of Kamyshevaha would be taken by the Russians in coming days or weeks. The most important updates of the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction are coming from the settlement of Novasulka. The pro-Ukraine resources published this map. This map was published by Deep State, pro-Ukraine resource, and here we can see that they expanded a gray zone to the west of Yanvarska. We're talking about this gray cloud, and the most important is that pro-Ukraine resources added this small pocket of resistance on the territory of Novasulka. So the Ukrainians are trying to tell us, the pro-Ukraine resources are trying to tell us that during the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their positions along these tree lines and along this river of the Diha and to answer the settlement of Novasulka from the northeast and to dig in deeper. So this is the situation that was recorded and published by pro-Ukraine resources. So very important update, because according to them, the Russians currently are encircled and the Russians are fighting in cauldron, but most likely the Russians knew what they were doing when they were carrying out this offensive operation. Now most likely the Russians are waiting for their main army to answer the village from the east, and then the village will be taken completely. At the same time, the Ukrainians of course are trying to counterattack, and the most important, the Ukrainians are trying to reinforce their positions in the forest to the west of the settlement of Novasulka on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha. Most likely this forest is the primary target for the Russians. It seems that most likely the Russians will try to cross the river of Volcha and to answer this forest, because first of all, this forest is very important because this forest can protect Russian troopers and Russian soldiers against Ukrainian FPV drones, which the Ukrainians most likely using massively. So, and if the Russians are able to take the forest to cross the river, most likely they will continue offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement of Velika Mikhailovka. This village of Velika Mikhailovka is very important for the Russians because you know that's on the way towards the road R85 between the settlements of Pokrovsk and Gulyai-Polye, there are hundreds of small villages. And obviously, by the time the Russians take these or another village, obviously this village would be reduced by the Russians till ruins completely. So that is why the Russians, by moving further in the western direction, has less and less chances, less and less capabilities and possibilities to concentrate additional forces. But if the Russians want to move further in the western direction, they need to use thousands of soldiers, and the villages like Velika Mikhailovka and Uspienovka can allow the Russians to concentrate additional troops. So that is why it is very important to take the village of Velika Mikhailovka as let's say middle step before moving further in the western direction to the cities of Pokrovsk and Gulyai-Polye. So most likely, and we expect that the Russians will try to take the village under complete control, because the Russians are about to start doing this. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction, where the Russians managed to improve their positions once again. If you remember, several days ago, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the settlement of Leontovich, or the settlement of Pershe Travnya, how the Russians call this area, were taken by the Russians. And just today, the pro-Russian resources published this video. Here we can see how exactly the battle for the settlement was taking place. The Russians attacked the settlement with FAPs, with artillery, with multiple launch rocket systems. The Russians cleared this area with FPV drones, and as usually in the videos of the type, we can see in the final seconds how the Russians that raised their flags in the central part of the settlement. So based on this video, we haven't adjusted anything. This is just another confirmation that indeed the armed force of the Russian Federation managed to take the settlement of Leontovich under complete control. When talking about pro-Ukraine resources, they reported that the Russians just improved their positions around the settlement of Zverova. So as we can see, there is a huge gap between reports that were published by the Russian resources and by pro-Ukrainian. So according to this report, the distance and the difference between different sources is more than 3 kilometers. So this is the gap between pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian resources. Most likely pro-Ukrainian resources will adjust their maps as well, but as for now, we can see the gap. The Russians continue offensive operation, and currently the biggest and the most probably fierce clashes are taking place for the southern and the southwestern part of the settlement. In this video, we can see how Russians were bombing positions of the 68th Jaeger Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. So during the previous 2 weeks, we got lots of videos exactly from this part. This is the part of Ukrainian citadel in the southern part of Pokrovsk. If Ukrainians lose control over the citadel, most likely we can start counting days when Ukrainians lose the control over the entire settlement and the entire agglomeration as well. As for the northeastern flank of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, the most important updates are coming from the area of Mirnograd. The Ukrainians during the previous days, using forces of 79th Brigade, counter-attacked in the area of Novoekonomichno, Novonikolayevka. And as a result of that fast-sliding attack, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions and most likely to reduce Russia's logistic capabilities. The Russians are counter-attacking right now, and according to several pro-Russian and neutral resources, during the previous days, the Russians restored control over some territories they lost during Ukraine counteroffensive, and the Ukrainian sources are saying that several units and several groups of the 79th Brigade were caught by the Russians in cauldrons, and now the Ukrainians are thinking how to evacuate these soldiers back in the direction of the city of Mirnograd. So it seems that Ukrainians, due to this counteroffensive, suffered huge losses, and most likely several units of the 79th Brigade would be removed from this area with the purpose to restore their combat capabilities. At the same time, there are still very heavy clashes for the settlement of Rodinska. The Russians discovered during the previous 24 hours several positions of FPV drone operators of the armed forces of Ukraine, and the Russians attacked them with FAPs and with artillery. The Ukrainians suffered huge losses. Now let's move further, and let's discuss the situation around the settlement by the name of Constantinovka. The most important videos are coming from the area of the village of Raskishna. The Russians reported that during the previous 24 hours they managed to discover another temporary deployment point of the armed forces of Ukraine, of FPV drone operators. Here we can see how Ukrainians were evacuating a drone of Baba Yaga type. Of course, the Russians discovered this position, and as soon as the Russians discovered this area, they began bombing and attacking this territory with FAPs and with most likely flamethrower systems. As we can see, the Ukrainians suffered huge losses, and most likely this temporary deployment point of FPV drone operators of the armed forces of Ukraine was completely destroyed. We believe that the Russians may try to test Ukrainian defense in this direction, because obviously, and Ukrainians understand as well as the Russians, if Russians are able to take under complete control these 3 villages, we are talking about settlements by the name of Roskinsnaya, Dovga, Balka and Stepanovka. If Russians can take this territory under complete control, this can lead to completely unpredictable consequences for the armed forces of Ukraine. Basically, the city of Constantinovka would be caught in cauldron. And telling the truth, the Russians have all chances to finish this offensive operation very, very successfully. Now let's talk about another area of Russian pressure. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, lots of updates, lots of interesting details were recorded on the line of Russian breakthrough in the southern part of the Kliban-Bytsky-Zaporizhzhia. The Russians discovered that Ukrainians concentrated lots of forces on the northern bank coast of Kliban-Bytsky-Zaporizhzhia. Here we can see how Ukrainians are moving in this area, and when the Russians discovered positions of the armed forces of Ukraine in this direction, they began attacking this territory. You know that there are still lots of resources who are saying that Ukrainians have their presence and save their presence in the area of the settlement of Kliban-Byk. But I would like to remind you that the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that this territory was taken a long time ago. In this video, we can see another temporary deployment point and the stronghold of the armed forces of Ukraine in the area of the settlement by the name of Pleshchevka. The Russians destroyed several strongholds with the purpose to clear the road before moving further in the northern direction. So, based on these videos and based on these icons, we believe and we made a conclusion that currently the Russian main focus lays in the area of Pleshchevka. The Russians are trying to destroy as many as possible positions and strongholds of the armed forces of Ukraine before moving further in the northern direction. Now let's move further and let's talk about the Siversk direction. When talking about this territory during the previous 24 hours, nothing special, nothing important happened. The same videos that we used to see yesterday and the day before yesterday. Lots of work of Russian FPV drone operators, artillery strikes, aviation strikes. The Russians are trying to destroy as many as possible equipment, communication equipment that Ukrainians use to work with and to use their FPV drones. And we see that during the previous days, the Russians were pretty successful with this. So in this video we can see another temporary deployment point of FPV drone operators destroyed by Russian artillery fire. Another temporary deployment point was destroyed in the area of the settlement of Dronovka. Here we can see the video how Russians destroyed another river crossing, Vansun Bridge, that Ukrainians used to communicate with the rest of Ukrainian soldiers on the territory of Serebryanka forest. So we see that the Russians are doing lots of things in this area with the purpose to ease the progress of assault troopers when the major offensive operation begins. And obviously this is going to happen very soon. As for the Liman direction, during the previous 24 hours, additional changes were recorded in the direction of the city of Liman. The pro-Ukraine resources reported that the armed forces of the Russian Federation during the previous 24 or 48 hours improved their position significantly in the southern direction towards the settlement of Derilova. By this attack, the Russians first of all are trying to cut the settlement of Shindrigalova from the main supply line that goes from the settlement of Liman through the village of Drobyshevo in the direction of the settlement. So, and as you can see, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly. Few more kilometers in the western direction and the road O527 would be cut by the Russians, and the Ukrainians on the territory of Shandrigalova would be caught in cauldron without any chances for evacuation. So the Russians are about to take this village, we see, and after that the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the direction of Drobyshevo, the first more or less big town in the direction of the city of Liman. With fall of Drobyshevo, Ukrainians will lose any chance to save control over Liman in coming months. As for the northern direction, currently there are very heavy clashes. During the previous 24-48 hours, additional counterattacks of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade of the Armed Forces of Ukraine were recorded. But the thing is that the Russians reported and they published lots of videos that confirmed that Ukrainians were completely defeated and were forced to fall back. In this video, we can see how Russians were bombing positions of the Armed Forces of Ukraine on the territory of Redkadub. This video confirms that there are still Ukrainians on the territory of the settlement. Several pro-Russian resources reported that the Russians managed to regroup in the area of Glushenkova to take this settlement under control, complete control, and to counterattack Ukrainians in the area of Malinovka and Andreevka. So it seems that the Barova direction is very, very hot, as we can see. There are very heavy and fierce clashes. The situation there reminds me the situation around the city of Pokrovsk, where both the Russians and the Ukrainians are attacking each other. As for this direction, we see that this initiative currently doesn't belong to anyone, neither to Russians nor to Ukrainians. As for the Kupyansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, we added additional kill zone along the river Voskol. During the previous 24-48 hours, another video was published that confirms that the Russians established complete control over the main supply and evacuation roads, and we can see lots of additional and new episodes how Russians were attacking vehicles of the armored forces of Ukraine. By the way, today several independent resources reported that the units of the armored forces of Ukraine requested for additional evacuation for the soldiers of the 14th Mechanized Brigade. 14th Mechanized Brigade is the core brigade of defense of the entire Kupyansk direction. It seems that Ukrainians are preparing themselves before the beginning of major evacuation and major retreat from the city of Kupyansk. Currently, the Ukrainians suffer huge losses, and the main reason of this is that the Russians managed to outflank the city of Kupyansk from the west and from the northwest. And currently, the Russians control every single road that goes in the direction of the city of Kupyansk and its agglomeration. The Ukrainians suffer huge losses and much bigger losses in comparison with the Russian side. So that is why they understand that this situation can't last forever, and they understand that sooner or later it will be time for complete evacuation. Yes, they will lose the city of Kupyansk, but this will allow them to save their soldiers and vehicles. And that's it for today. Military of Samurai channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes on my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.